So today is both the final rally before the 2024 election and the final chapter of our study of true American patriotism, which we started in the 4th of July and which we've called happiness, our founding governing principle. America's founding as a country was and remains 248 years later unique in all of history. There's no other example of a group of people so communicative about its situation, its choices and dilemmas, its grievances and hopes, than the American founders. They were clear-eyed about their predicament as colonists under the thumb of a colonizing ruler who was increasingly far away from them, both geographically and philosophically. When they declared that they must attempt to break the bond with that ruler, they eloquently explained to the world what they were doing and why. The Declaration of Independence laid out the argument for the creation of a nation governed by the consent of its people. The preamble to the Constitution prescribed the method to be used to form a more perfect union. For thousands of years, philosophers from Plato to Locke had theorized on how a just society might be run. The American founders went further and actually did it. As Abraham Lincoln summarized almost 90 years later, the founders brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we've discussed here many times how that proposition was more limited when it was written than when we try to apply it today. The founders were brilliant and dedicated and courageous, but they were also elitist and hierarchical. They said all men are created equal. The way some yell at us from car windows, all lives matter. For some, all does not mean all. For our founders, all did not mean women. All did not mean black people. All did not even mean non-land-owning white men. Thomas Jefferson might as well have said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all white land-owning men are created to be no less entitled to power than a hereditary king." But this is our country. Though America's founders may have been flawed and limited, the glory of their experiment cannot be denied. Instead, it is up to us, the later generations, to improve upon the original experiment, to hold our country to its original promises, while expanding its core principle to mean what it says. And that effort starts with voting in elections. The Declaration says that all men are created equal and that the best government is the one which best improves the happiness of its people. The goal of America, then, is to elect a government which best improves the happiness of all people. The Declaration begs the next question. Okay, smarties, how does a government best improve the happiness of all people? That question is answered a dozen years later, after the Declaration, in the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish the framework of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Fine words, right? The government is us. We'll work hard to make the country more perfect. We'll focus on the happiness of all people, including future generations. Yay, let's go! But how is the government actually supposed to accomplish this? When we elect leaders, what is their mandate supposed to be? As we enter the voting booth, how do we assess what's our nation's to-do list? The government's imperative tasks in affecting the happiness of its people are laid out in that preamble. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, must do 5 things. Secure the blessings of liberty, promote the general welfare, provide for the common defense, ensure domestic tranquility, establish justice. If that doesn't sound familiar, it's because I listed them in reverse order. And I listed them in reverse order because if I just read them off, then all of us would just be singing that song in our head and going right through because we've heard it 1,000 times. It's a list we've all memorized. But I want us to stop and think about each of these clauses as they are, not just as an intellectual exercise, but rather as a reminder to keep fresh the foundation of our country. When you vote for the person who you believe will secure the blessings of liberty. In America, we are blessed to have certain liberties, freedoms, as inalienable rights. Of course, we can argue or fight over how to balance my freedoms against your freedoms. FDR identified the 4 essential human freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. How do these freedoms relate to voting for a more perfect union? Freedom of speech. What happens if you criticize your leaders? Which candidate can accept opposition, can tolerate dissent and protest without threatening to shoot those who disagree with him or her? Freedom of worship. Which candidate better allows all religions to flourish? Which candidate suggests bans on people from non-majority religions? Which does not claim to be a candidate chosen by the God of a majority religion? Freedom from want. Which candidate focuses economic policy more on need than on greed? Which candidate promotes plans to cover the uninsured, to assist with childcare, to use tax policy to support the poor more than favoring the wealthy? Which candidate attempts to regulate bad corporate behavior, and which would dismantle important consumer protections? The Economist magazine calls the United States economy, quote, the envy of the world, end quote. Does this matter when so many don't feel its benefits? Freedom from fear. Fear is a tough one. Is this fear of crime, fear of immigrants? Is it fear generated by hate speech and lies which attempt to turn neighbors into enemies? For FDR in early 1941, when he gave his For Freedom speech, 10 months before Pearl Harbor, freedom from fear meant limiting acts of physical aggression against any other country anywhere in the world, which might suggest today support for Ukraine, or for strengthening alliances with friendly nations, or for skepticism of the tactical flattery of adversarial nations. For some, securing the blessings of liberty might mean abortion, either from the perspective of a woman who should be as free to choose whether or not to be a parent as a man is, or from the perspective of one who opposes abortion rights. For some, securing the blessings of liberty might mean the right to carry any kind of gun anywhere, at any time, in any situation, for any reason. For others, securing the blessings of liberty might mean the freedom from fear that your child will be shot at school, or your spouse shot at church or at a synagogue, or your brother shot at Walmart. And that leads to the next requirement of a more perfect union. Remember, we're going through the list backwards. Promote the general welfare. How do you vote to promote the general welfare? This is the directive by the founders to look beyond personal, selfish happiness. I might be happy walking around punching people. I'm not. But that would not promote the general welfare. To form a more perfect union, we need to exercise our rights in a way that blends the personal and the collective. We are a community, and our general welfare depends on fair treatment of all, the kind treatment of all. When this constitutional provision was drafted in 1789, I think the drafters were anticipating Justice Southbury's vision of a more fair and kind community for all. Thus, when people oppose what we do here, when they yell at us one word, the name of a national candidate, they are saying, promoting my general welfare doesn't mean your general welfare. So be careful to remember that when we promote the general welfare on our side, that must include the welfare of those with whom we disagree. As Lincoln said, with malice toward none, with charity for all. The next requirement of government is to provide for the common defense. As we've discussed before, the Declaration of Independence says that the two goals of a government are to effect the safety and happiness of its people. So common defense is essential. Whether you think that means more financial support for the military, or more diplomacy, or the respect for our veterans as heroes rather than as suckers and losers. When you vote, you do so for common defense. The next provision of government from the preamble is to ensure domestic tranquility, peace and calm in our home fronts, in our communities. Love your neighbor. Love over hate, kindness over meanness. A more fair and kind community for all. We don't have a lot of domestic tranquility these days, but a more perfect union strives to ensure it. So when you vote, vote for candidates who will work on love and unity rather than anger and division. And remember that to ensure domestic tranquility, we may be voters only one day a year, but we are citizens every day. You want more domestic tranquility? Do it yourself. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Finally, the preamble calls upon the government to establish justice. We say no justice, no peace. Justice is to treat all people in all circumstances fairly, to judge people not by the color of their skin or the color of their hat, or their religion or lack of religion, but by the content of their character. And since the content of one's character can be difficult to figure out, justice means accountability for one's words and deeds and actions and inactions. Established justice means penalize bad behavior and lying and harm. Established justice means holding people responsible for what they do and what they fail to do, including being sentenced for felonies. Established justice ultimately means to live by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The founding of our nation was an experiment, and we are still working on that experiment. 160 years ago at Gettysburg, Lincoln questioned whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. He spoke at a time of war, over the battlefield, testing that concept of a nation. Many, on both sides of this week's election, feel that we are also living through such a test of our nation's foundation. If the founding of our nation was an experiment, though, it was also a promise. We, the people, in order to promote our general happiness and common welfare, will accept our responsibility to do what we can to form a more perfect community for all. When we vote, we choose the country we wish to live in. When they voted to form our government, America's founders chose the country they wished us to live in, one whose elected leaders would best affect the safety and happiness of the governed. When you vote for a more perfect union in 2024, true patriotism calls upon you to choose the leaders whom you believe will best achieve those results for ourselves and for our future generations. Thank you.